biological warfare is what we're looking at here. But we're going to say this is an early biological warfare program. So some things that did come up is that in that region of the world, the potato beetle normally makes its first appearance mid-July, about that. These fully grown adults were appearing in May, in mid to late May. So that's a full 2 months early. There also were no signs of larvae. So it was just suddenly we have a bunch of adults scrambling around, which if they were going to go through their life cycle, you would think there would have been signs of larvae in the area.
Don't the larvae bury themselves?
Well, the larvae first eat the plants and then dig down and hide in the soil to emerge as an adult.
Okay, yeah.
So theoretically, there should have been some larva signs.
Yeah, okay.
But there were none.
Well, but when the larvae emerge from the soil, have they changed into beetles at this point?
Yes. Okay. Yes. They go through 4 stages. The larva, I believe, is the second stage. So there's egg, larva. There's a third stage where they don't eat.
Pupa.
Pupate, yes.
Pupae.
And then,
how do you say it? Yeah, pupa.
Pupa.
Pupae?
And then they pupate.
Yeah.
And then there's the 4th stage, which is adulthood. There are some places, though, at that time that potato beetles were showing up where they shouldn't have.
Well, don't they always show up where they shouldn't be?
Shouldn't they be nowhere?
Yeah,
Really?
that's kind of the way I see it.
Let's see. So in Zwickau, the beetles were found in the square in front of the rail station, which doesn't have any potatoes.
Well, maybe the Americans put them on a train.
Maybe. Near a dam in Sosa, they were discovered in bathtubs inside of houses. These are kind of weird places for a beetle that normally would go after a plant to appear.
Yeah, but it's also a weird place to get airdropped into.
This is very true.
I mean, airdropping into.
Yeah, there's that. And also, bugs are kind of stupid that way.
Yeah.
Because,
They do.
They can
just
show
go
up in the
places.
darkest places. I mean, it's like, a lot of this stuff got introduced to Europe through just shipments of food from, like, America, et cetera, and then between European countries and stuff. So if they're infesting a shipment of food that's being shipped by rail, it wouldn't be that unusual to see one in front of a rail station.
That's very plausible.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the first thing I thought when I saw the rail station. But then at this dam, it seemed a little weird that they're crawling around on the firewood and in the house in the tub. See, but then again, it might have been a swarm of them that just moved into the area. It's hard to tell.
You never know.
There's not a lot of concrete facts.
The railroad tracks might run right past the house and the dam.
Here's another thing that came up, and I found this in one place, so I can't say how reliable this is.
I love those.
But there is information that says that a leaked report from an American investigative committee was discussing the bad tactics and insufficient preparation of the whole, as an entire potato beetle campaign, and they were criticizing the fact that the spreading of the beetles over the German Democratic Republic had not followed the distribution plan.
I see.
Okay, so this is supposedly an official leaked report.
From an American investigative committee from what? From where?
I don't know. That's the hard part. I couldn't find it anywhere else. Everything I looked for, it didn't surface anywhere else. So I don't know how strong that claim is. Another bit in the Americans did it theory, intentionally did it, is there is information out there about a chemical which is referred to at the time as E838, which was a new pesticide which was being marketed to take care of the potato beetle. So it makes sense, according to this theory, that what you do is if you want to get the German people under your thumb and you want to make them depend on this pesticide and have to purchase it from you, go ahead and introduce the pest. Then they have no choice but to turn around and buy the product from you to protect their fields and their crops.
Did they?
I
They
didn't see anything.
They didn't do that, did
said
That didn't work.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Well, no, there was giant campaigns of pesticides being put onto fields. I've watched some of the old propaganda films, and they are driving up and down with tractors and guys using gas and pumping it into the ground and spraying it everywhere. What they're spraying, I have no idea because it doesn't say. Obviously, it's a 3-minute propaganda movie.
it probably made the potatoes really healthy too.
I'm sure that it did.
Very
taste better.
consumable
Yeah.
potatoes.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm sure that it did.
Yeah.
I guess
So-
that might have been the trick, right? You introduce the beetles to kill off half the supply, and then you get the Germans to poison the rest.
Yeah.
You're done.
There you go.
like it.
Easy.
Problem solved.
So in other words, under the heading of the Americans done it, there's one, the American government done it, and another one is that Western capitalist companies did it.
Yeah, essentially, I'm lumping them all under the Americans,
Yeah.
whether it's the American government or American companies or
Yeah.
corporations.
Yeah.
I'm kind of just putting it all under that umbrella.
It's fair. You
So-
can kind of assume that, at that point in time, a big enough American corporation could say, hey, U.S. government, I got this idea.
You're gonna love this.
You're going to love it.
just
And
run
then it
with
could
me on
just
this.
be like they're in cahoots at that point.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
is easily conceivable because it did happen. I
Yeah.
mean, there's all kinds of
Oh, yeah.
antitrust things that came out in that era, so
Yeah.
very easily could have happened.
But the thing about it is if you really want to push your chemical, and you really want to make some money, you probably want to do it to a bunch of farmers in a country that actually has some money. And East Germany really didn't have any money.
No, it really didn't.
But the biggest hole in the whole idea that American warplanes dumped all these beetles is that, like, these farmers that discovered all these beetles suddenly in their fields, wouldn't they have also found thousands of tiny little parachutes? Yeah, because after all, you can't just dump the beetles; they would plummet to their deaths.
You are amazing, sir.
Yeah. So,
You are absolutely
Lord.
amazing.
That's the best mental image I've had all day.
Yeah. So that's
so okay.
We're
I'm
going to
joking a
move to
little
the
bit
next theory here on that note, which is that the Germans did it to themselves.
Yeah, and this is the most obvious thing because they're the communist countries. I mean, you don't really need to do any work to get them to have like crop failures and famines. They just kind of do it to themselves.
I guess that yeah, it makes sense to me.
Well, there's actually some documentation on why this could very well be, and I kind of fall in the same camp as Joe. I kind of think that part of the problem was that they did it themselves. But
Yeah, I think you are in a place where your people kind of hate a place like the United States, but don't totally hate them yet. So maybe you self-sabotage a little bit and say, "Look at what these horrible Americans are doing to us."
Or more likely to sabotage themselves through sheer incompetence.
That's what
Well, let's
yeah.
roll back the clock, though. Let's roll back the clock 10 years. This theory, we have to step back in time even farther. So we're going to go to 1940. Germany has invaded France. So they take it over. They're investigating anything that they think is important in terms of industry, capital, you name it, research. They want to find out what it is so that they have an idea of what all their allies are up to.
Okay.
Well, the German military was investigating the Le Boucher research facilities. During that investigation, going through all their paperwork, they found paperwork that was linking intentions of the French and the English to go in together and basically dump potato beetles on Germany to slow down their war effort. If you think about it, you've got a giant war machine. You need tons and tons of food.
Yeah.
It's
not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. Yeah.
No. So obviously, the Germans freak out a little bit. They're not happy about this because this is a problem. So they need to make sure, are we okay? What's going to happen here? As they keep going through the records and they invade more and more France, they keep finding more stuff from this same research facility.
Because they had taken the records elsewhere for safekeeping.
Right, absolutely correct. And those records gave the Germans a pretty clear picture of how a plan to drop the beetle on them could take place. In comes Professor H. Clue, who was a bit of an esteemed researcher, and he somehow managed to get himself in with the military and get himself in charge of a secret program to look into potato beetles.
That seems like a thing that wasn't so hard at the time.
I imagine it wasn't so hard.
Yeah.
Like I said, we've got the professor here, and he and other people obviously in charge are monitoring reports of their secret agents. So we've got secret agents involved.
Oh.
And one of their secret agents, who happens to be in England, sends back a report, and it's dated April 30th, 1942. And it says that the English have received from the Americans a cargo of 15,000 potato beetles plus an unknown number of Texas ticks. Surprisingly, the Texas ticks just disappear. Nobody hears from them again.
They escaped.
I'm pretty sure they're Bora Bora.
Yeah, they took over England.
But this puts them in a full-fledged panic, and they start work because they've got to get up to speed. And in 1942, the Germans establish the Potato Beetle Defense Service.
No, I want you to say that in German.
Joe, are you able to say that one at all?
Kartoffelkoffer Abwehrdienst.
Wow.
Just the long.
Kartoffelkoffer Abwehrdienst, I think is how it's pronounced.
Okay,
Yeah.
and they also went ahead and they set up the Potato Beetle Research Institute. Can you give this in the...
Kartoffelkoffer Forschungsinstitut. Yeah. Pardon my cheesy accent.
Well done.
Yeah, anyway.
Better than I can do.
Yeah.
You know, I think, just as a little aside here, it's actually pretty well known that the British MI5 actually controlled just about all of Germany's agents, if not 100% of them in World War II. Mm-hmm. Because what they would do is they would, instead of compartmentalizing between agents, they'd send an agent over there and they'd say, "Hey, get in touch with agent so and so, or Frau or whatever the guy's name is, or Franz, and get in touch with Franz, and he'll help you get set up and everything like that, and he'll give you some handy tips on how to get along in England and everything." So you go get in touch with Franz. Franz had already been caught and turned by the Brits, and so they kept rounding up agents like this, and they essentially controlled the entire German intelligence network inside of England.
So it's very possible that this report was a complete total bupkis.
Disinformation. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say,
They-
so what we're saying here is that the English were like, all right, what's the most outrageous thing we can try and convince them?
Is you try to get them to waste resources.
Oh, yeah.
If at all possible. Get them to instead of get them to worry about stuff that you're not even remotely pursuing, and so that they won't defend themselves against the stuff that you actually are pursuing, and just get them to waste their time and to waste resources.
This is a
Right.
perfect example of that, because here's what happened. So the Potato Beetle Research Institute and Defense Service, both of them got together, and in October 1943, they took 40,000 live potato beetles, and they, via a plane, released them over a field in Spire. Is that how you say that?
I think it's Spire.
Spire. The beetles were painted so that they were easier to see, so that the troops in the field could find them.
Unfortunately, they painted camouflage.
They managed to recover 100 beetles.
Yeah, oopsie.
They did it again with 14,000 beetles this time, and they only got 57 of them back. They then went, okay, well, maybe we should stop using the real thing, and they started using fake wooden beetles, and they didn't do any better. They were recovering the same number of them in the field.
Of just inanimate painted beetles.
Yes.
They couldn't find these things
Little
that aren't
wooden
moving.
pieces that they just dropped that were painted, and they could only find 50 some odd out of 14,000. That's pretty bad.
Kind of shot themselves in the foot there.
Yeah.
Although, actually, the little wooden beetles, it might be that the living beetles tried to mate with them, and so they might have actually interrupted the breeding cycle.
You might have. No, you don't. So that's what the Germans did.
So
Now,
why did they release these Beatles? What exactly was the point?
Well, they were planning on turning the tides and using them against the British. Their idea was, well, we'll go ahead, and if you want to do it to us, we're going to do it to you, and we'll just spread them all over England, which obviously they couldn't gauge how well it worked. But they still reported in 44 to the High Command that they were ready to put out an operation of a massive potato beetle infestation, and all they needed was to have the word, and they would drop them.
Obviously they were, because even they couldn't find their
obviously,
beetles.
you know.
So they knew that, like, the English people weren't going to be able to find their beetles.
Yeah.
The only problem they had with getting them in there is, like, how are they going to get them over there? They would have to, like,
During a blitzkrieg?
For a couple hours
I
in a
don't
plane,
know.
I bet they could survive.
The RAF is pretty good at shooting down bombers. I mean, most of so they may be possible.
Well, so they shoot down a bomber, and the bomber crashes, and the beetles
all the beetles get out?
escape from the bomber.
Yeah.
Right? That's
Here's a picture. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, well, that is the end of the Germans did it to themselves. We've got...
So what you're saying is that these ones that they released, because this happened...
Well, to me, it seems like, okay, well, if you've released, we're in these two accounts, basically 54,000 beetles onto your own soil. Chances are they're going to get a foothold, and they're going to start spreading. And if it's during the war, it may not be noticed, and right after the war, people really aren't reporting what's going on. So if a crop fails, it fails.
I guess the other question is that you said that they do that, like, little hibernation thing if the weather isn't right or whatever. So I guess the other question is what kind of weather was happening then, because if they dropped all those beetles, right, people would have noticed those beetles, and then if they had all the larvae and the larvae were in their little, like, pause period because the conditions weren't good for, I don't know how long they can survive.
I don't either, to be honest.
But, if they could survive for, 8 years or whatever, which...
I don't know that they'd survive that long, but I imagine there would be enough of them around that they would be all over the place.
There's still food to eat. They would just go through their regular life cycle, just like always,
Yeah.
And so
hard to say, but let's move on to theory number 3.
Okay.
Which is a very simple one. The Germans didn't have enough pesticides, and they weren't using them.
Yeah.
It's a very, very simple theory that post-war, you're broke, you have no money, nobody's giving you much aid in terms of agricultural supplies, so you do what you can, and that's all you can do.
Yeah.
And if you aren't spreading insecticides on your fields on a regular basis to keep down just all manner of pests, go figure, suddenly they just bounce right back and take over.
Yeah, and when you think about it, I mean, something like a factory that would produce insecticides would be a pretty popular wartime target for Allied bombers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so if they had any pesticide factories at all, it was probably pretty inadequate in terms of supply.
Well, and that's exactly it. So it makes sense that they could have just already been there and normally were controlled with whatever pesticides were used. But let's move on to our last theory here, which is just another case of they accidentally got spread there by people.
Yeah.
Because we do this all the time.
Oh, hell
we
yeah.
introduce things everywhere. Like I said before, the beetle had made it to German soil in the late 1880s, and it had been controlled. According to, again, a couple of different sites, there are reports that at a U.S. military base in Bordeaux, the Colorado potato beetle began to infect the area. I'm guessing because, as you said earlier, Joe, they came in on foodstuffs and then just got loose and got a foothold. And according to these reports, they then spread during World War II. They went to Belgium, the Netherlands, and Spain, which all kind of are right near Germany. So it makes sense that they naturally would have just progressed into that country because they don't really care where the border is. All they care about is where their food is.
I was going to ask if there's any kind of record of big windstorms or anything like that happening around this time, if that, the beetles were just trying to fly to another field or something and got blown by a big gust of wind. Or
Kind of like the Wizard of Oz.
Kind
sort
of, yeah. We're not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we're not in Spain anymore.
Yeah.
The weather here sucks.
I don't know if a bit, because they do, I assume they fly.
Yes, they're a beetle, so they can fly.
So I don't know how they travel from one field to another.
I would imagine
assume they fly.
They would fly.
And if I don't know how far they travel or anything like that, but that could help explain why people weren't seeing signs of larvae or eggs or anything like that, just full form beetles.
Well, and I think we've talked about in other stories in the past about there's a giant windstorm and it sucks everything up and carts it 50 or 100 miles and then just boop, drops it all.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is that, let's recall the Germans dumped 54,000 of these things onto a field and were hardly able to find any of them, which means these things could be like spreading all throughout your fields and your whole region. And until it reached a certain point, you would not even notice. Yeah. And so apparently these little guys are hard to see, even when they've been painted.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. So it's one of those stories that there's all kinds of ways. I personally think that there's no one theory that's right. Mm-hmm. I don't think that the U.S. did it intentionally. Yeah. I don't think the Germans did it all on their own. I think that it's everybody involved in this story is probably a little guilty.
Yeah.
But we don't know exactly what caused it.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to look for like historical precedent, usually, governments that are incompetent, and they have things like crop failures and famine. They want to blame somebody else.
Oh, of course.
So of course the East Germans want to
stay in power.
Yeah. So that's kind of my thinking.
Yeah, and I think you were saying before when we were talking about this previously before we started recording is that Berlin is in East Germany, right? Uh-huh. So there's going to be airplanes that are from the U.S.
all the time,
flying all the time.
All the time, yeah.
So it's not as if this was an uncommon thing to have U.S. planes going overhead.
I mean, I'm sure that American and British and French planes were flying from all points of the compass, or at least from the west, because West Germany kind of semi-encircles East Germany, or did. It's not anymore. And then with Berlin right here smack in the middle. So you could have planes approaching from the southwest, the northwest, the west, and all.
Well, and the Berlin Wall didn't go up for another 10 years. So there could be planes that were coming from the other direction too before it became a no-fly zone.
Yeah, and so and I don't really see the motive, right, to be honest with you, for us to do that, because especially given that this is post-war, it wasn't definitively established that Germany was going to be sort of semi-permanently divided at this point in time. It was still a state of tension between the Soviets and the Allied forces, and it still hadn't really crystallized into the form that it finally took with the building of the wall 10 years later, and then many, many more years of repression in Germany and all that. But it wasn't set in stone as of 1950. And plus, Europe was still recovering from the war. And so the idea of deliberately, and there was already been a lot of food shortages and famines in Europe because of the war. And so the idea that we would want to go out there and just, make things worse, well,
it doesn't make a lot of sense.
We were kind of trying to get the continent to recover, So that's yet another reason why I think it was probably just it happened, and the East Germans just didn't want to shoulder any of the blame themselves. So pointing the finger at the Yanks.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, that having been said, that's the end of our theories. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, we're going to go ahead and put up some of the links to this story on our website. So if you want to check them out, you're more than welcome to. That website is thinkingsidewayspodcast.com. We're always looking to hear from our listeners. So if you've got some thoughts on the story that you want to share, or you disagree with something that we said, let us know. We appreciate that.
If you are a East German potato beetle, we want to hear from you.
Yes, indeed. You can always go ahead and send us an email. That email address is thinkingsidewayspodcast@gmail.com.
We actually have some listener mail.
We do. That's right.
Well, actually, we get thousands a week. Did one of them stand out?
Yeah, this one was really great. I liked it a lot, so I thought I'd share it with our listeners.
Yeah.
So it's from a woman by the name of Stephanie.
Hey, Stephanie.
Hey, Stephanie. And it just says, hello, I came across your show recently after about a year of hoping a podcast like yours would pop up somewhere on the internet. I like your whole vibe of presenting known information about mysteries accurately and trying to make educated guesses about what happened. I also end up cracking up a lot during your shows. And then she gives us some suggestions of shows that, Stephanie, I want to assure you we're definitely going to take on in the future. I don't know about near future.
I remember looking at those recently, when the ones that she had suggested. So those were good suggestions.
Yeah, so we love to hear from you guys about how much you love us.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I'm just glad somebody else is laughing at our jokes.
Yeah, me too.
Obviously, we're not that funny, but at least
we think we're
sort of
funny.
Yeah, we're hilarious.
Well, yeah, we fooled somebody anyway. But thanks for the story ideas, and we'll get right on that. Well,
Very cool.
Well, email aside, what else do our listeners need to know?
Well, they can always listen to our show. That's a real key to a
Being
podcast.
a listener?
Yeah.
Yes.
Being a listener.
Now, our website always has the podcast on it. You can always stream it right through there. We're also on iTunes, so you can download, or if you want, we are also on Stitcher. So if you want to use your mobile phone and go ahead and stream it right there, another option for you. We always make it available.
If you do iTunes or Stitcher, please feel free to leave us a rating or a comment.
A good rating.
Or a review. I mean, if you
Well,
like us,
what
leave
else?
us a good. I'm not going to say leave us a good review. But
Thinking Sideways is not brought to you by Crawfish Boxing. Instead, it's supported by the generous contributions of people like you, our listeners, on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Thinking Sideways to learn more.
Thinking Sideways.
I don't understand.
Does not compute.
You never know.
Insufficient data to formulate a reply.
Stories of things we simply don't know the answer to.
Well, hey there, and welcome again to another episode of Thinking Sideways. As always, I'm Steve, joined, of course, by...
Devin?
And Joe.
And once again, we've got a mystery.
What?
Yeah, we do.
It's a pretty scary one, too.
Well, no, it isn't. But, you know what the thing is? I had so much fun last time that I hosted doing a wrestling episode
seems
that
like
I
it's been-
decided we'd do another one.
Seems like it's been a million years since we did that episode.
It really does,
Yeah.
because in our world, it's been fun.
At least, yeah.
Yeah.
3 weeks.
Okay, well, we're not actually going to do a wrestling story.
Well, a little bit.
But kind of. It's kind of a wrestling story.
Yeah.
We are this week, for anyone who, as Devin would say, didn't read the episode title, going to be talking about Mr. Andy Kaufman.
Yeah.
And you might say, well, why? Well, the mystery is Andy Kaufman really dead or not?
Dun, dun, dun.
Because he's one of those people who has had sightings of him for years.
Mm-hmm. He's the new Elvis.
I like Andy a little more than I like Elvis at times.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm okay with that. I'm going to get so much hate mail for saying
You
that.
are.
Sorry.
No.
I'm sorry. So let me give everybody just the quick, real brief version, and then we'll get into some details. So brief introduction to Andy Kaufman. He was a comedian. He had his career was in the 1970s, the late 70s, mid to late, and then the early 80s. And he is known for being a character on the TV show Taxi. He died at 35 of a very rare form of lung cancer on the 16th of May, 1984. But because of all of the stunts and the crazy things that he had done over the years, a lot of people really didn't believe that he had really died. They were sure that it was a prank.
Well, he was known as the guy who would take a joke a little too far.
He
I think a
often did.
little is an understatement.
Well, I'm trying to be generous. I don't want to say bad things about dead people.
Oh, no, there's nothing bad. Andy took jokes
Way too far.
to the nth degree.
He
did.
took it to when it stopped being funny and then kept going.
And then eventually started being funny again.
There's a really interesting Radio Lab. I'm sorry to digress for a second.
Yeah.
A really interesting Radio Lab episode about this, in which I encountered one of my favorite comedians in the entire world for the very first time ever. Her name is Kristen Shaw, which you all know her. She's got the voice. You know who she is. She's Louise on Bob's Burgers. Yeah. Anyways, they did this show called Kristen Shaw as a Horse, where it was him and it was her and a male comedian on stage, and literally he would just go, "Oh, Kristen Shaw as a horse, Kristen Shaw as a horse," like for 15 minutes straight while she danced around on stage. And it's that progression. It's a very well studied thing now where it's like it's funny for a minute and then it's not funny and then it's really not funny and then it's hilarious again. Just like this story I just told.
Yes, it is. And thank you for sharing,
You're
Devin.
welcome.
I don't know how to follow that, so we're just going to start talking some more about Andy Kaufman. As I briefly mentioned, started his act in the 70s, started in comedy clubs, and wasn't always that well received. He, as we had briefly mentioned, his style of comedy was different, and it was not what people were used to. And it really, really put people off because, I mean, we've all been to a comedy show. The typical thing is a comedian gets up there and he does his shtick of jokes and for 5-10 minutes, whatever his time is, and then he gets down and he leaves the stage.
But Andy didn't really think of himself as a comedian.
No, he didn't. He was more of
Performance artist?
performance artist. Thank you, Joe. That is exactly it. It was art. And so he would get